What's up, disciples? I am Zach Zender and host of the Red Letter Disciple, and I'm bringing my friend Chris Johnson, who's a pastor and friend, in to co-host with me, and we're actually bringing a guest in studio today, Jed Mullenix. Three of us want you to be the greatest disciple of Jesus you could possibly be. That's the goal of this podcast, and some of us are pastors who are listening, and we really have a desire. You may not be a pastor, and you may still have this desire to reach your city for Jesus. And so Jed Mullenix is the president of Within Reach, an organization here in Omaha that includes churches, leaders, businesses, nonprofits, and more, with a singular goal to reach more people for Jesus in the city of Omaha. I think it's one of the top citywide movements because of everything that's went into it. You're going to hear, I think, a master class on what it looks like to launch a citywide movement that'll reach more people for Jesus. And so if you're a pastor or someone that wants to reach your city, man, take some notes if you're able to. If you're driving, I know you can't take notes, but just come back later. There's going to be a lot there. And so it's going to be a really powerful episode. We are called not just to reach our city, but did you know that every church is called to reach globally as well? And I want to tell you today about our sponsor, Children's Hope Chest. They're one of my favorite organizations literally in the world. We've been over to my family to see the work that they do personally in Uganda, and we have the privilege of sponsoring 4 kids in the village of Los Amates, Guatemala, where our church has partnered with them for a long-term maximum impact over a decade, 2-way transformation. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Hope Chest today. When you partner with Hope Chest, not only do you get that 2-way transformational experience, what I mean by that is you're going to transform lives in another community, but your church's lives are going to be transformed too. How do we do this? Because you're going to make a difference with the dollars and the time that you spend, but you also get to experience the love of that community and learn from them, because every partnership includes multiple mission trips for your church to that community overseas. And I really believe global mission trips are a faith accelerator in the life of a disciple. And I do believe that there's a right and a wrong way to do mission trips. And I think Hope Chest gets at the short-term mission trip, the right ways to do these things, because they are a helping without hurting model, which means we're going to go in there, we're going to establish relationships, we're going to work with their leaders, we're going to empower their people, and we're not going to go in as sort of like the savior, like we know everything. We're going to go in with dependence on God, and we're going to learn from one another. They check all the right boxes for me. And so, hey, doing global work is part of what your church is called to do, Pastor. And so I want to challenge you to get into the game and partner with an incredible organization that not only has a great track record, but also has great transparency along the way. One of the first steps you can take, you might be asking, how do I do this? I want to invite you to go on a vision trip with them. They are getting ready now for some summer vision trips to Guatemala, Uganda, and Ethiopia. These 3 amazing places. You can find out more about Hope Chest and sign up for one of those vision trips at hopechest.org/Lutheran. We got a lot of Lutheran churches that are partners with Hope Chest. And if you're any pastor, you can check that out, but you can check out hopechest.org/Lutheran. And we thank you again, Hope Chest, for being a sponsor here on season 8. Before we get into Jed's episode today, if you haven't yet subscribed or follow on your favorite platform, please do that and spend a second or 2 rating and reviewing. That means the world to us. So let's get to Jed and today's episode. Let's do this. Well, we got a great episode here on Red Letter Disciple today. We've got Jed Mullenix in the house, in studio with us today. Chris? Yeah. I always love the in-studio guest. Jed serves as the president of an amazing group here in Omaha called Within Reach. He's led local churches for 15 years in New England and now Omaha, but he was drawn to the possibility that the city church, the church of the city, might move together in unity for the good of all who call our city home. And I have loved being a part of this citywide movement of Within Reach and think it's one of the top city organizations we have. And
that's a lot more encouraging than just out of reach,
for the name.
Yeah.
Without reach or just out of reach.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. But it's awesome to have Jed. He's married to Beth. They got 5 kids. He loves all things outdoors, travel, long evenings around the table with friends. We're around a table right now, which is good.
That's a square table.
And we're excited to have you, Jed. So thanks for being on the Red Letter Disciple, man.
5 kids.
My goodness, 5.
Wow, man.
Yeah, we
Way to go.
were I mean,
What
is it unheard of? One of my good
What are you,
friends. I thought we were in New England we got that a good bit, and then
What, you own a farm?
we do. We actually have 5 farms.
5 farms. All right.
No, it's really funny. One of my good kind of friends as of recent, they have 9. So I always thought I was like laps ahead.
You're kind
and now
of
I'm
behind.
Like, oh gosh, we got some more work to do. So no, we're great. Beth and I, almost 25 years, which is
Congrats,
fun.
that's great.
Kids,
Wow, nice.
oldest married and in Seattle on the West Coast, and then youngest 5th grade. So we got the whole
Oh,
gamut.
man.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's one of the guys in our church, a leader in our church, as an evangelism strategy, suggested that all the pastors and all the church members just have more kids. Then we'd have more people in church.
Ooh.
Am I right?
No, you're right. Our actual president of our denomination said that's the most effective evangelism.
Just have more
strategy.
kids.
That's a procreation strategy.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would recommend that for the
Yeah, because I kind of
the soul of the evangelist.
because I kind of also was like, okay, having kids is hard, and maybe just telling the story of Jesus might be a little bit
Right.
easier. Than
I
having
stopped at
another
2.
baby.
Yeah.
And I
Believe it or
also
not, there's
think-
a lot more that goes into having kids than only leading them in the way of Jesus. I just read an article this morning that said it costs $300,000. Now,
Mm.
that's no reason not to have 2 or 3 or 5 or
I
9.
shortchanged my kids by about $200K.
Yeah. But anyway, goodness gracious.
They're
Yeah.
expensive,
So
yeah.
they're so much fun. We're having the greatest time.
Yeah.
Most days I say everyone has a Monday morning, but by and large, we just have the greatest time.
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, we both got 2. And the other thing I didn't realize is, my kids wanted a dog. How expensive a dog is. That's not. I think
That's another $100K.
I think it's $100K easily. Yeah.
Yeah, life's expensive.
Yeah.
And Jed's
This is
Jed's-
encouraging.
all within
so
reach. Just start having kids.
I don't know if we're saying don't have kids. I think we're just saying
No.
have kids.
Mhm.
But also there's effective evangelism strategies
Outside of
having
kids?
There are.
I suggested that if that's our main denomination strategy, that we need to pay for reversal of vasectomies.
Oh. There you go.
That's like a high budget item in our
Yeah,
denomination.
I think
like to
that's-
get more people in
Sure,
the game.
Right.
Sure, to get them in the game.
Oh, I didn't realize that's what I had to do.
limiting factor to, anyway, we don't need to talk about that.
It does
but-
cut off the flow, so to speak.
Uh,
I feel we're digressing.
Can we re-record?
We'll get back on the flow right
Okay,
now.
hello.
So, Jed, it's great to have you, really. And I love that I get to work with you here in the city of Omaha. As I mentioned, we've got a really awesome city movement called Within Reach that we're going to talk about. But I want to reverse engineer to get to today
Wow.
because I want to see more city movements happen. But how did you talk me through your faith journey and kind of what led you to where you are today?
Faith journey begins growing up in a family of faith, and then early on in my life, experiencing a fair amount of abuse trauma outside of our family, unbeknownst to our family. And then that set me on a path of really what I describe as like 2 lives, bifurcating living. One on the outside, following Jesus, on the other side, kind of deeply broken and following a very busted up path. And that led to kind of a series of addictions in my life. My family knew theology school, so that's the route that I took, but I describe it as theology student by day, addict by night.
Yeah.
And it was about my junior senior year of college in school, that ministry school, that the Holy Spirit really began to bring me to my knees, to a place of true repentance, and that of course began a long journey of healing, after which I met my wife. But during that space, there were a couple of significant movements in my life where I encountered the good news of Jesus for the first time at a heart level that really began to transform me, and learn what it means to live kind of an honest, vulnerable life underneath the covering of Jesus' grace and goodness. And so what happened though during that time, this will go back to kids. I met Beth. I'm healing, like the Holy Spirit delivered me from addiction, but there's a whole series of layers underneath that.
Mhm.
So it was a long journey, and we started having kids really quickly. We married in May. We married in May. Our goal was to wait 5 years. That's everyone's goal that I've
Right.
ever met.
Do
And
the
we made it
travel, have
about-
fun, and
Right. And 16 months later, we had our first. And
young Christians.
yeah, just in love. Poor Christians. The
Right.
joke is that we were, I was in transition, and Beth said, I want to buy you a Christmas gift, so I'm going to go off birth control for a month. And she did. And then our first box of diapers 9 months later.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kind of nixed that savings. And but then we started having kids, and we're like, let's do this,
Yeah.
So we had our first and second, third, fourth. All that said, during that time I was in ministry. Well, what do you do when you've got just kids who kind of keep coming and you're caring for a family? And we were having a great experience. I went out to join a church plant in New England and ended up leading that community for almost a decade. And that was a great experience. But during that time, the Holy Spirit was kind of stirring in me, like there was something else that I wanted to do for the last half of my professional life. And yet when you're a family of 7, you don't go work for Home Depot tomorrow, right? You just got to figure out kind of prayerfully what that looks like. So we moved back to the Omaha Metro because it's where my wife's family's from. During that time, God began to shape that desire, give me a little bit more clarity. I joined the Within Reach board.
What year was this?
This was 2015.
Okay.
Within Reach started in 2016. I joined the board in 2017, and then was with them for 3 years before I stepped on as our first employee. So I in learning about Within Reach, I kind of just fell in love with this idea of city movements, and it was brand new to me, and have enjoyed it ever since.
So what do you mean by city movement? Unpack that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it can be a bit of a buzz phrase. City movement is this idea that if we can get the people of Jesus in the metro working together in one direction, you can actually, with that movement, you can enact change over the long haul. And that's kind of our working strategy, is if we can unite and then activate people of Jesus and business community in the church with what I think it's, I just lost his name, op-ed writer for the New York Times, David Brooks, calls 30-year eyes, is what he describes it as. He says, if you can have 30-year eyes for a community and work at it for the long haul, you'll actually plant seeds you'll never see the fruit of. You'll plant trees you'll never sit under, that adage. And that's what we're after.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you in Within Reach, and we'll talk more about what we're doing with Within Reach, because I think I want everybody to hear and catch, a little bit of vision for what might happen in your city. But you meet with a lot of pastors. You're interacting with the local church or local church leaders every day of the week. And so kind of as you look out, it's a discipleship podcast, as you look out at kind of the landscape of the local church, as we're moving into 2025, we're into it now. Like what are some of the things you're seeing in the local church, through the local churches, good, bad, and indifferent, things that we should be noticing?
Yeah. The first thing I'm seeing is there's a lot of joy. I think, believe it or not, there's a tremendous amount in our city of joy at recognizing we have a good king, joy at recognizing his church is a good thing, okay? And that if we can work together, there's great joy in realizing I'm not the only one in the city working for the good of the city. So at least in our context with this network, there's just this deep abiding, like, oh, I see it every day. Like, I'm not in it together. I can connect with him or her over there, and we can learn from one another. And not only pastors, but business leaders, community leaders, and just this deep abiding, like, wow, we get to be a part of this together. That's one. The second thing I think is there's this realization that what has worked in the past isn't working today. You talk a lot about that in these conversations. And I think there's an honesty. For the most part, there's a humanity, and sometimes humanity keeps us from honesty, but there's an honesty to say, okay, I think we need to try some new things, which leads to innovation. And I think Within Reach in who we are, not necessarily the organization, but who we comprise, is a relatively innovative bunch. Yeah. I could share some stories around that, but I'm really encouraged by the heart of innovation. And then I think one of the things that makes us really unique that I'm seeing here, but we maybe work with another 50 networks across the country, is I think there is this growing collaborative spirit to say there's something we could do together that on our own we can't accomplish. And so I would say those joy, humility, innovation, collaboration are key.
Yeah. What about on the flip side, like dangers or things that like, we really should put some focus on this that you're seeing from some of those pastors?
Yeah. I think every bright has a dark, right? Yeah. So I think just like in our own lives, there's a flip side to it. So in the joy, there's the angst and the stress. We see that a lot around this time of year where you come through the holidays and you're on fumes and you're running into another year, and Sunday's always coming. Yeah. And one of the things we see that we try to really kind of help lift some of our leaders, kind of their heads above the water, especially on the church side, is this idea that, oh my goodness, my next next big task is 6 days away, then 5, then 4, then 3, because Sunday's on its way. And we try to help kind of that 30-year eyes for us has been a great imagery or metaphor to help people think a little bit further out, which we'll come around to in a minute, how we're doing that organizationally. But I think that's one. And then I think the other thing is when it comes to an honesty, humility, I think a typical response is to get in our trench or rut and to keep doing what we've always done. It's one thing to acknowledge what has worked is no longer as effective, but it's another thing to do the innovative work of trying something new. We're seeing several stories of that, which we're really encouraged by, but I know we have many leaders who would say, I just still don't think that we've caught hold of that. And so as joy starts to kind of decrease or diminish and kind of the old stays fresh, you get a bit stale feeling, and before long, and then you get your head down and you're not collaborating together. So I would say just everything I shared just on the other side. I mean, where we're seeing the best work take place is where leaders are kind of lifting their heads up, uniting with 2 or 3 other in their region, and they're saying, how can we do some great work together?
Yeah, and it's really hard. I've been in that seat before of like being the guy and having, focus every Sunday, and then Sunday's coming 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 1 days away. And without getting up over that, it is really easy to day just take care of what's in front of you. And I think that's a huge piece of our heart at Red Letter Living on the disciple piece is like, everybody knows it's important who's in the church, but you are doing the day-to-day stuff. And so you're not getting out and above what you need to get. And so there's this, I think, guilt and shame for a lot of pastors, either with discipleship or with what you're talking about of like, yeah, we know we need to do something different. It's just, I don't know what to do. And I can't because I'm in the day-to-day stuff. And that's where, Red Letter Living, Within Reach, we try to be an ally to say, we get that, but you also don't have to do it alone. Like, listen to us and let's have some conversations and let's talk about that, because we've helped others, you've helped others. And like, you don't have to go at this alone, which is really cool.
Yeah. And I will say, like, the fact that Sunday's always coming is a good thing. Jesus has given us Sunday. Right. So the last thing we want to communicate is, if you could just get away from that, all would be good and effective. Not what we're talking about at all. I think there's deep delight in the fact that Jesus has given us the gift of Sunday and the gathered community. I think the challenge for us is how to create margin or boundaries around that to where we also have space for innovative, thoughtful, collaborative work.
Yeah, it's not the only thing. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It is a big thing.
Yeah. It's huge.
But how do we do it well?
Yeah. And it takes time, it takes risk, it takes conversation, it takes, all that stuff. So speaking of like time, risk, let's go back to the kind of the origin story of Within Reach. I know that, I don't know that it had formally founded by the time you got here, and obviously you've taken it to another level, but I believe it was a few pastors. I think my dad was there, and Pastor Les Beecham and Mark Ashton and several guys. I'm probably missing a couple, but take me all the way to the back, to the kind of the backstory of what you know about Within Reach and how it started.
Sure. Yeah. And the backstory starts decades ago. I mean, you've got history that we kind of trace back to of several city movements, whether it's prayer movements or unity movements, or a handful of guys meeting in a basement of a church saying, what can we do together? And there were ebbs and flows to that, as there are oftentimes in city work or collaborative work. In 2015-16, Mark Ashton and those that you mentioned, including your father, began to dream of what could we do in this season, and many of them in their prime of leadership, to be a blessing to the city, and specifically with a focus on how do we reach the city with the goodness of Jesus in a way that not any one of us can accomplish on our own. And so that's the idea of Within Reach. We believe our city's within reach, meaning every person, man, woman, and young person, having the opportunity to hear the goodness of Jesus in a way they can understand and respond to. So that's what the movement was started. Everybody had like 3 friends, so they all called their 3 friends. And before you know it, 20 churches are in, 20 pastors are in. The good news is a majority of those are still in to this day. A few have retired or handed on the baton of leadership, like Mark. But many others are still in the game and still a part of Within Reach. I think that's been critical to giving it every chance for success over the long haul. Is everybody around that table approaches it with a real open-handedness and humility. It doesn't have to wear their tribe, their name, their vision. They just say, how can we do this together? So 2016, it was launched. It was launched primarily as a church-centric network, meaning how do we get every church in the network who loves Jesus into the game of reaching people with Jesus. And that was that way about 2016 to 2020. And those were critical areas. We built the foundation of the network, getting more and more leaders engaged, the story out, and then COVID happens in 2020, right when I stepped into leadership. We can talk about that. And then a lot has developed since then. I mean, I would say the last 4 years of Within Reach have just been a kind of a beautiful trajectory of it just growing and who we are and who we reach and how we reach them. But those early years are really fun to look back on and fun to be around the table with those leaders who we would not be here without them.
Yeah. And I think we have a lot of pastors that listen or watch. And I know that there's like a lot of like-minded pastors that are in agreement of like, yeah, we want our city to do something great and work on something great together. But what are the challenges? Like, that's great to have that desire and that intent, but there's a lot of challenges then with actually wanting that and making that happen. So what are some of those challenges?
Yeah, we've touched on one, but I'll kind of build it out a little bit. Number one is everyone we work with has a primary vision. Yeah. So Within Reach's vision, which is something they're a part of, is really to the side of the primary thing they're a part of. So if you're a pastor, your church is your main thing that you're leading. If you're a business, your organization is the main thing you're leading. If you're a nonprofit or parachurch organization, that is the main thing you're leading. So we're actually inviting them to be a part of a second thing. And for some, they already have a second thing, which is a denomination or a church planting movement or a fill in the blank. And so we're inviting them to be a part of a third thing.
Right.
So I say, number one, there's a primary vision. So they're all following God's unique calling on their lives and on their community. And we've got to be very nimble and clear and gracious in the way we invite them in and provide a lane for them to run in. We recognize this is the visual we use. Everyone's running in their own lane in our network. So we have to create these opportunities for kind of strategic intersection of lanes and then recognize they'll go back out to their lane and run. It just changes the way we approach things. It changes the timing that we try to accomplish things in. And so that's number one. The second thing is the reality that we're all operating on limited time. So how many asks we put before people, we have to be really cautious and strategic of. So what I can't do is say, hey, we're going to meet twice a month and we'd love you to bring your whole team and join us because this is the most important thing. In fact, I could share stories about attempts at that have not worked. But instead, we have to really create a rhythm to the network that complements and serves them well. And then here's the key. You have to make sure every time they show up, it's worth their time, right? Because the moment people sniff out that it's not, you'll find your engagement dwindling. So that's another one. And then I think the third thing I said is there's this innate human-derived gap between intention and action or application.
Oh, we could talk a lot about that. Yeah. Discipleship right there.
Yeah. It's Monday mornings for me. And so the question is, if there's a desire to work together for the good of the city, how do we create clear lanes for them to actually act on that desire? I don't question really anyone's desire that we're working with. I think they're all in from a kingdom perspective. They all recognize together we can do more than we can do on our own. They all want to kind of leverage the gifts or the skills or the neighborhoods or communities they're a part of to work for the good of the city. But it's just all, how do we do that? And inevitably something comes up on Tuesday morning that gets in the way of our best intention, and then we forget about it for a month. So those are three things for me: vision, time, and just that natural gap between intention and action.
Well, I love what you say because, like, I know Zach is running his own business and he's a teaching pastor, and I'm running a nonprofit at the same time. I'm on the board of a couple different places, and you're right.
And running a church. You're running
a church plant as well. Small thing. But so, like, for me, when somebody asks me to be a part of something, like, pretty quickly in the first hour of the meeting, I'm assessing, is this going to be worth the limited amount of time that I have left, besides family and stuff. I don't have 5 kids, but, 2 was quite a requirement as well,
Bit of a lightweight, but we'll talk about that. Talk about that at another time.
Wow, no judgment there.
Wow, I'm gonna have 3 more.
Oh wait, shoot, no, 2's incredible. I mean, having young people, it's a primary calling. It takes a lot of time.
Totally, and you're right. I think, like, today, it's, for me as a church pastor, I feel like it's easier to ask people for their money than their time, and like, it's tricky. And I think I've
fallen into that same thing where you go to either a national conference or a local regional thing and you get all excited. Yeah, we're in this together. And then, like you said, you go back to your church or go back to your family, and it's like, that was a cool moment, but I don't know what to do with it.
That's right.
And that's where I feel like you have elevated the game for Within Reach, unlike hardly any city movement, I would say, happening in the nation, because we can continue to talk about, we want to do that, and we can continue to have good intention. But if we don't have some sort of action steps or something we're working on, that's the miss. And that's, I think, the thing that you've realized is, if there's a gap there, let's give language to that gap, so that not only when you come, you get fired up that we're in this together as one with the city, but like we kind of know what we're working on, as opposed to just this ethereal thing that sounds great. And so talk to me then. I know it's a labor of love to get to that point, like years of a labor of love, but how have you narrowed that gap or sort of given us greater focus so that we don't just come, have a great moment, go back to our churches, but we're actually, even inside of our churches, still accomplishing what the city needs and wants?
Yeah. So how do we do that? Just to clarify the question.
Yeah. How did you bridge that gap? So it's less showing up and just getting excited and going back to our day to day, but now we're shooting towards something together that feels tangible.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because early on in my role, and COVID really allowed us this. So in many ways, terrible, in some ways, good came out of it, right? And one of the good pieces that came out of that time was we were forced into a listening posture. It's the best outcome of that year to 2 years for us is we just determined after several nose plants that we were going to listen rather than try to do. And I would recommend that. And it's very Jesus-like, but we've learned a lot through that. So we're doing these listening tours with our existing, 30, give or take, churches, having lunches, hosting them, creating conversation. And I remember one of the recurring themes I heard during that time was that people were growing weary of the hype. Exactly what you just described. Every time they would come to one of our gatherings, every time, they would feel, this is what was communicated, that there was this like, we're going to go change the city tomorrow. And, then they go back to hurting communities, congregations, people who are doing without, lost jobs, lost lives. It was a hard time. And they didn't need more hype. Number one, they needed cared for, they needed heard, they needed invited into something where they were valued and imparted value to them. And so we heard all of this and we said, you know what, instead of hype and changing the city tomorrow, we're going to have, as Brooks now has given me language for, 30-year eyes, and we're going to go after a vision that's really going to take us long into the future. And we don't know that, to be honest, we don't know that our city's all going to bow their knee to Jesus. But if you look at a year, 5, 10 from now, we want more people to encounter Jesus than did yesterday, and more next year than this year, and so forth and so on. And we want to keep moving that ball forward. So that was one thing. We said we're going to kind of let go of the hype, and instead we're going to create gatherings, and we're going to include more voices and tell more stories and impart more kind of quality experiences that can lead toward change in their particular context and then collectively in the city. So then out of that, of course, that posture of listening came the State of the City project, which I know we're going to talk about, but it became a real landmark project for us because we said that if we're going to love our city, we must know our city. Knowing our city begins with listening. And so we invited the whole network into this posture of listening to our neighbor, listening to our parishioners, listening to the city leadership, et cetera. And so we just created this roadmap for people to, participate in what we were doing. And this is 21, 22, 23 when we finally published this project. And out of that, I think there was just this excitement of, man, together we can actually do something. And here's what we're attempting to do. So if I was encouraging anyone, I would say, number one, a posture of listening is so, so important. We could talk about that. Number two, I would say out of that posture has to come a series of actions that you're inviting people into, and then people can vote with their feet. And number three, you have to make sure that when you're getting together, everyone feels valued and that they're leaving wanting something more. And so they begin to look favorably on those gatherings. Be cautious about the hype, because hype puts what feels like a little gas in the tank, but it turns out to be a little bit of fumes, because excitement is easy, but motivation for the long haul is the challenge, I think.
That's gold right there. Yeah. I love hype, but yeah,
I love hype.
It can fume out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so, and you're right. Like I know I've been a part of that listening project, but I was one of, I don't know, hundreds of people that were a part of that. And so it really was not a quick listening posture just to get to the things as quick as possible, but a true like discernment and listening. And so you guys teamed up with Barna to do this State of the City. If you're watching, you can see a little book that came out of it. And I believe we were maybe the 7th or 8th city that Barna did something like this.
We were number 5.
Number 5. Mm-hmm. Okay, number 5. And so why did you find it important to partner and team up with a group like Barna, who's fabulous, but has significant costs because they're going to do everything the right way?
Yeah. 2 reasons. One, because probably 3. Number 1, I like to dream big. Yeah. And so I like to write my short A list. And I'd rather be told no by someone that I kind of take the risk to ask rather than always wondering whether they would say yes if I had actually asked them. So that's number 1. Number 2, I know that Barna's on the leading edge of culture and faith and research. And so I thought, as a gift to our city, I want to give them the best. And so why not ask Barna to be part of this? And we had kind of a mutual connection through Barna. And now Barna, kind of their research side, has become good friends and kind of advocates of Omaha. But at the time, we just had one connection, and we followed that thread to the next person until we had a conversation. But number 3, and I think this is important, if you want people in your city to listen, like to kind of, you want to perk their ears, attention a bit, I think you've got to bring your best to the table. So as a network, we always say we give our guests our best, and our network really are our guests. And so I felt like one of the best things we could do was offer them the very best in innovation around research, faith, culture, what we know to be true of Omaha. And we did 4 different ways of listening, Barna being one of the key ones, kind of the centerpiece of that. But that's why we pursued Barna. It was a cost, but immediately the cost paid for itself. Yeah. And of course, there are now many benefits to what we learned with their partnership.
Cool. And we're going to talk about kind of what came out of that was a real clarion call to do 4 outcomes for the city. But before we get to those 4, was there something that in the data that you found through all the listening, whether it was through Barna or through the listening phase, that was surprising to you about the city of Omaha? And if so, what was some of that?
Yeah, there were a few things I would say. Number 1, I think, so anything I say is probably not going to sound new to you, but it just put research behind to like buttress it, right? Or to give it like some grit. So as an example, we've heard a lot that, man, the church is losing its voice in the town square. Right? Mm-hmm. Meaning, as people look for how to shape a community or a city, they're no longer listening to the church or the voices of the church, the leaders of the church as much. Okay, well, we've heard that. But what we wanted to see is that actually true in Omaha? When people face crisis or having emotional challenges or family challenges, financial challenges, when they want to talk about faith, are they turning to the church? And one of the things we recognized through the research was that just 10% of people, and now you have to do some reading into what's shared because of the particular question, but just 10% of people in that space where they really want to reach out to someone beyond them actually turn toward a local faith leader. 20% might turn toward a friend who's a Christian, and then you have another 70% who are turning toward a variety of other things. So what that told us is when it comes to the church and its position in the city and wanting to reach the city with the person of Jesus and his good news, what's not going to happen for my neighbor today who wakes up and has challenges with a marriage or a job or income or emotion or anxiety, fill in the blank, is they're not going to say, oh, I had to go to church on Sunday because there I can get help.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the flip side, what they did say in our research, the city, when I say they, our city, our neighbors, is they said, if the church offers these helpful solutions or opportunities, we would be interested. But that presents a significant gap between what would be of interest and the actual desire to go and seek help or assistance in that way. So what we learned is there's this gap between need and the desire to seek help for that need inside the local church, and what fills the gap. We think Jesus actually has the answer for that he gave to us 2,000 years ago in his most basic command of loving your neighbor as yourself. And if we'll do that as the people of Jesus, we can talk about that. But that was one big thing. Second thing is you'll hear, I mean, today, of course, it's nothing new, post-COVID especially, that mental health is a significant reality in our world. Of course, that's true. But what we needed to see through the research was what does that actually mean for the man and the woman living next door to me, or the young man on campus, or the young woman, who's, my barista today, or fill in the blank, whatever it may be. And so we actually not only were able to learn about the mental well-being of those in Omaha, but to understand how many are experiencing anxiety, sense of isolation, disappointment, grief, fear, and how do we shape what we're doing as a network and who we represent to actually be able to communicate to the hearts of those people. Third, I think, is this. I think that, let's just talk about millennials and Gen Zers for a moment. I think that, it can be said that there's a decline. There's various research. Some would say there's a decline of moving away from the local church. Others would say millennials are actually waking up to and desiring more authentic expressions of faith. And I think both are true.
Yeah.
We could talk about that. But what that for us showed is a statement that comes out of it is that we believe people actually want to experience Jesus as good before they believe he's true. They want to experience Jesus as good before they believe he's true. And so what that means for us is it's a real call to the people of Jesus to say, how do we demonstrate through our lives and the places we live, work, learn, and play that Jesus is good? And that's where I think that gap can be filled. So there's 3 examples.
Yeah. I think that's so powerful, like for pastors and church leaders too, that I think sometimes we get the order mixed up that you have to believe before you belong here. When I think what we're hearing and seeing through the data, at least in Omaha, is, sometimes we just got to have them be around us, and belonging's good. And then the belief will come. And if we could flip that order, I think that's actually far more Jesus-like, who was very quick to say, come follow me, without a belief statement. that was prior to that.
Yeah. So I was wondering, how many people did Barna interview for this?
Yeah. So, Barna does this quantitative, qualitative, independent research.
Yeah.
And I still don't understand how it's all done,
Yeah.
to be honest. But let's say if I were to pull out my credit card, I'm a Chase, Sapphire guy.
Oh,
congratulations.
Thank you. I still don't have the level to be able to.
Yeah.
Is that unlimited credit?
Yeah, I actually don't pay for anything. I just swipe
You
it.
just swipe it?
Yeah, and mine has a metal inlay. It's really
Whoa.
nice.
Can I see it?
Yeah, you can. I thought it was really nice until I went to the airport. I can't remember what place I was flying through, and I there's a Chase Sapphire Lounge.
Whoa.
I don't have the level you need to get into that.
But did you show them your card?
I did, and they said, you
No?
need the next level. They were very kind.
If anyone's listening out there,
That
let's help
hurts.
Jed. That's a
Yeah.
big deal. We need to get him in that Sapphire Lounge.
Yeah,
Let's
and
do
then
it.
just don't even pay attention to everything they mail you. You don't have to pay for anything.
Wow, you have to be next level.
What was the question?
I'm just curious.
How do you get to Chase Sapphire Lounge?
What
No.
and how much more do you have to spend? And
He was asking about
how many people
quantitative, qualitative data. Like, how do we? What does that?
Yeah.
mean?
So let's say I'm a credit card guy, Chase Sapphire.
That's what I heard.
I can be. That's where we got derailed.
Yeah, right.
I can be invited into independent research projects for someone.
I see
And
what you're
so
saying.
that's an example. There are people who sort of are professional
But
survey
they probably won't
takers.
interview you because you're not that next level.
Right.
Right.
I'm not.
So they're professional survey takers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they do. You kind of opt into taking surveys, and then in Omaha, how they look at it is they look at our radio reach. So what's
Okay.
our band reach in the city, and then they make sure that the segments of the city are accurately represented.
I see.
Man, they do this all over the country and the world. And then they invite people into those surveys and make sure that the ultimate result, whatever it was for Barna, I think it was, they interviewed, let's say 700 people that well represented the city that they feel like is a sample size that would reflect the same results you would get if you interviewed 70,000. There comes a point in research where everything balances out.
Right.
And if you need to know more, I'll put you in touch with.
No, that's interesting. And someday, hopefully, you guys, can move past radio and get actual cable television here.
Wow.
I know. So that's what they did. Barnett at 700, and then we didn't talk about this, but then we.
He liked that line that he gave the radio cable thing.
That was nice.
I don't know.
Don't encourage him.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know, man. That's good though. Okay,
so there was that. There was more research.
There
We
was
can talk
more
about that
research.
another time.
okay.
But no, that was Barnett, and they were so good, and they talked
this
us
is
through.
incredible. This book.
Thank you.
Because it's available for sale. Like people can check it out.
It is.
This is really well designed. This is amazing.
Yeah, and so what I loved, there were a couple things in addition to what you said that I think is just so What I love about a project like this is it gives us objective data, because I think, in church world, a lot of times we have these pie in the sky ideas and we just go for them. And when I talk to a lot of my business leader friends, they're like, you're crazy. Like the first thing we would do before we do any big initiative, sink money into anything, is we would get some sort of data or targets to shoot for so that we know we're working in the right direction.
That's right.
Does that make sense? And I think that's what this did for me. There were a couple surprising things. Well, one surprising and one that was like a affirmation of what I felt. The surprising one here in Omaha, at least, is there's a higher level of trust with Christian leaders and pastors in our city than I think what we nationally hear. We hear all these podcasts of this person fell, this person fell, this person fell. Nobody trusts the church leaders anymore. That's actually not what we saw in the data, which was kind of fun. The one that was affirming for me was something I felt when I moved back to Omaha nearly 4 years ago. I was like, gosh, it feels like a lot of people here know who Jesus is, but there's just this, it's not revival that we need. It's an awakening. There's just like a sleepiness that I felt like was on our city.
Yep.
And the data showed that. And this is so much of what I do in discipleship too, is I think it showed out of the 5 cities you said that they studied, we had the highest amount of people that quote unquote self-identified as Christians, 70%. And surprisingly, we had the lowest percentage of people that came in as what their definition of a practicing Christian, which was like 16%. And so there's like a 54%. So when I'm walking around in the city of Omaha, more than 1 out of 2 people I'm running into know who Jesus is, but they're not practicing their faith.
But then why do you have so many big churches here? It's unbelievable. I drive around this town. I'm from Orlando. We don't have like a tenth of every corner. It's like boom, 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 boom.
There's a lot of big ones here.
Yeah. Like, how are they filling them out? Crazy.
I don't know.
All
yeah.
right.
And that's part of what we're trying to do. But that really was, it gave objective language to me of what I felt. And I feel this about discipleship in general. I think those numbers are not just Omaha. I think they're going to be increasing more and more. And so to think about as pastors and as everyday followers who are listening, that it's probably 1 in 2, just above or just less right now, that know who Jesus is, but aren't living it out. And I think there's a real opportunity there for us to talk about the good life is more than just believing so that you go to heaven when you die, but you can actually, like, Jesus can impact your life now.
Yeah. Well,
you got to practice it, right? What are your thoughts on any of that?
No, the other thing I was saying, I just opened this thing up, and I've been working with youth for a long time. And one of the things that they researched was mental health. You mentioned mental health, and adults 18 to 32 in the last month, once or twice, have felt stressed. 94% of them have felt stressed, and anxious, 81%, burnout, 75%. Like, there's a huge mental health issue going on, and it's not just in Omaha; it's everywhere. And I don't know, like, as a pastor, I would never have guessed it was that high.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think the two, maybe we could find some ways that they relate to one another.
I hope so.
I do. Let's get, so hold that, because I'm going to kind of, if I forget to draw it together.
I'm going to hold it right there. Got it in there. All right.
So here, I would say this is my humble take, but I'm going to give it my best go. And keeping in mind, we did lead a church in the Boston area. And so we've kind of been in the heart of kind of an urban, suburban area that is filled with people who are skeptical of faith, but desire the things that faith provides. Meaningful community, purpose, an answer to life's biggest questions, et cetera. And so I kind of come out of that context. So what I'm going to share is, I think, is informed by that. I think in part, the local church is speaking past the average person who comes on any given Sunday. Now, we know the average follower of Jesus comes every few weeks, maybe every 4. So what I mean by that is, I think that all of our pastors' networks, leaders, are well-intentioned in the leadership that they're doing, and they're doing a great job. But this ties into a little bit of what you were sharing, that I do think when it comes to how do I practice my faith on Monday morning when I go back into the office, or on Friday night when I'm with my friends, or on Saturday morning, I say, when I'm around the soccer field next to my peers, whose child is also playing on the soccer field. Being given the goods of how do I take my love for Jesus and into that space and live in a meaningful way, underneath the calling of the kingdom of Jesus. And so I think what happens, opinion is that a lot of the reason that there's one of the reasons that there's a gap there is there's a misunderstanding in what it means to follow Jesus in the day-to-day. And because I'm not doing that, then there comes this gap where I'm not following Jesus in the day-to-day, oftentimes because I haven't received what that actually looks like. And then because then we go to this, I'm not abiding in Jesus, and all of our leaders teach that well, but I'm not abiding in Jesus. And then out of that, the fruit of that abiding isn't playing its way out in the place where I live, work, learn, and play. That then it becomes this disconnect. And then my primary affection for Jesus or engagement with him comes on the weekend. And then there's this 5 or 6 day gap. Mm-hmm. And in that gap, then things start to come in like, well, what do I do when I have financial difficulty? Or what do I do when my family's struggling? My mother-in-law has cancer. What do I do in that space? How do we navigate that grief? Or what do I do when one of my children is kind of spinning off the rails? And who do I go to? And even though I come on a Sunday morning, I think here's the second thing. A lot of people, I can speak from my own example. A lot of people come and they live anonymously in that space. I would really encourage us to not assume that everyone who shows up on Sunday morning is meaningfully connected. Mm-hmm. And really, please don't, make the kind of mistake to think that getting them into small groups is going to solve that issue. Small groups are a wonderful thing, but that's not the only solution. What I mean by that is my wife and I lead Alpha, if you're familiar with Alpha, in the church that we're a part of, and we have 4 campuses. And one of the things we recognized in one of our sessions of Alpha was, I think we had 70 adults there, was that as they were coming, they had been a part of our community for quite a while, but had not connected in a meaningful way. Alpha created that 13-week experience where meals are shared and conversation. We kind of go into life a little bit beneath the surface, and then true community takes place. And then what was happening is on the Sundays when we would see each other, we'd be like, Jamie, Tom, Chris. And then we're known. And interestingly, this is not a promotion of Alpha or the Mullenixes, but these folks will on Thursday come to our house for dinner. And what has happened is we've crossed sort of the Rubicon of anonymous, every 3 weeks engagement in a local faith, kind of place of faith, to now life on life relationships. Interestingly, one of the gals there invited my wife, she was just there last night, to be her sponsor for a celebration recovery experience. And we just look back on that and we celebrate like that would not have happened had we not been giving like a meaningful space where relationships can take place. So I've sort of talked at length, but I think those are really critical. One, ensure that you're speaking to the hearts of followers of Jesus' everyday experience, because then they can practice it. Practicing Christian. Perfect. Number 2, create spaces where we can go beyond a superficial and relationship with those that we're attending next to. And then I think real life change starts to happen.
That's so good. I think that's a great opportunity for us in what the data is saying. I think it's always looking at the data and then asking the right questions that come from it. And those are awesome. So talk to me then, because we were getting all of this data, right? And I've been on one of the research teams for this with you. And I know we had conversation after conversation after conversation about what does this mean and what do we do with all this? And what we ended up deciding is we don't want to take 100 pieces of data and have 100 objectives. That's just too many. So the goal I know you set out from the beginning is let's figure out like 3 to 5. We ended up coming up with 4. Like real outcomes. So we can't maybe hit everything that the data is saying, but we can tangibly come together to do 4 things in our city. And so talk to me about what those 4 things are. They may or may not relate to your city, but they probably have aspects that they will, but what I want leaders to hear is like how detailed and specific we're getting so that when we work together, we know what we're doing.
Yeah. That's a great question. And how we identified the 4, because we did create a long list of things we could do.
Right.
And we acknowledge that across our city, these things are being done by someone. But we said, what are the unique things that our network can do together? And so we looked for where 2 things happened. One, where the Holy Spirit was already moving. And then number 2, where the data was pointing. And where we already saw God moving in the city, and where the data pointed to, that intersection created a potential outcome. That made the list much smaller. And then we said, well, we can only really over the next decade, that's our goal with each of these, really commit to 3 or 4. And we chose 4. They are mental health care and support. And I can go into each of these. Number 2, village school partnerships. So we want to create villages or ecosystems of care around each of the local schools in our city with a goal of 100 over the next 10 years. Number 3, we chose flourishing neighborhoods. So we partnered with the state of the city through Barna with Harvard's Human Flourishing Program. And what we learned from Harvard and what we learned from Dr. Vivek Murthy, our Attorney General, and what we learned from others, quality research that's been done, is that the simplest way over the long haul to affect a community, neighborhood, city is by neighbors who are engaged and love their neighbors well. Come to find out.
Yeah.
So
did Jesus say something like
I've been searching for that in my Bible.
I can't remember the word. Love your something as you love yourself. Anyway,
with the stuff.
I some of it as leaders were just like, wow, we just needed, and it's stuff we think about all the time.
Someone once said that we should just do what Jesus said.
And then and we say activate the church to do the same. So flourishing neighborhoods, number 4, flourishing churches and leaders, which really is the bread and butter of Within Reach since day one. We've expanded that now to be leaders in community business in the church. But we really want to see our churches thrive. To see that happen, we want to see our leaders thrive. To see that happen, as a result, we'll see our city thrive. We think that's the formula.
And so each of those outcomes has like a numerical goal to shoot for, which is really cool. So what then do you expect, or let's say let's say I am, but if you get someone that comes then to a Within Reach gathering or that wants to partner, like what is the goal for that pastor or that church leader to do all 4 of these, to focus on 1 or 2? Like how do you navigate that next step then?
Yeah, we invite them to consider doing 1 that they're not already doing. So my guess is that all of our network partners would say, we want our neighborhoods to flourish.
Yeah.
And we want to activate the people of Jesus to be about loving their neighbors. Now, we learned through the research, because one of the things we did is interview 50 faith leaders around that very idea is, okay, you want that, but how effective is it actually happening? And one of the things we learned is there's a deep desire, but not a clear application on a majority of our partners. And they shared that. They were very honest and kind of vulnerable to share that. So we not only want to say, hey, go do this, but here are lanes you could run in. We want to resource you, and you're a part of the team that's doing that. And so we want to resource them. So let's say they're doing that. Within Reach really is kind of trying to help them flourish. So just by attending and being a partner, they're already engaged in that. So we'd say, then the third would be either really dig into and commit to your flourishing neighborhoods in your community, or consider adopting mental health care, and I could explain what that looks like, or consider a village school partnership with education, elementary, middle, high school in your neighborhood. And so we just invite them to consider 1 more that they're not already doing. We don't want to, of course, assume that anyone would adopt all 4, but by and large, as we look across the network, everyone's at least engaged in 2.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I know King of Kings, like we're opening new campuses, and every campus that we open, like it's a requirement that campus would be partnering with a local school. And we have this, of course, at our first campus. And what's really neat is it's a public school, and we're volunteering, and they use our space, and they use our parking lot for things, and they use, so it's a shared partnership. But then when we opened a new campus and there's a school next to it, like the principal of that school was like, oh, you've got to have King of Kings as a partner. They're going to be fabulous. And so the more and more we get into these public spheres, especially with schools, that's why that came through the data, is like we can really make changes when we're getting these kids at their faith formative years, right?
Yeah, and when you do, you're exactly right. When you do a quick kind of pan over the life of Jesus and you look at these points where he says things like Luke chapter 4, where he unrolls the scroll and he talks about what he came to do, and talks about it being fulfilled, about opening the eyes of the blind and relieving the oppressed, setting them free, and giving life to those who don't have it. That you look at that, or you look at the loving your neighbor as yourself, or you look at the parable of the lost son, lost sheep, lost coin. In each of those, there's a particular need or crisis point that Jesus is coming as our living King to bring hope into and resolution for. And our good friend Tracy Beal at School Connect in Phoenix says that the school is the portal into the greatest needs of the neighborhood. And so what I would say to the people of Jesus is, if you're going to follow in his path and do the things he did, which is our calling, right, as Jesus people, then you've also got to figure out, in the same way Jesus did interact with his neighbors and engaged their hurts and learned where they needed help and extended them hope, then we got to do the same. And I think education in particular is a space where we can identify where are ways that we can serve our city and love our neighbor in such a way that's felt and meaningful and leads to really life change. And we're seeing that. And not only we're seeing that, but this would be an encouragement to all leaders in various contexts, is the local school leaders, administration, maybe with some exception, but by and large, especially in Omaha here, welcome support as long as you don't come with an agenda. If you come with the agenda to serve and care, I haven't met a single administrator who isn't ready for that. And so when we come to say, how can we, through the portal of the greatest needs in the neighborhood, care for our young people to see them thrive? We were just with Omaha Public Schools this week, and they set what they call a moonshot goal, that in the next 10 years, every child in the district, which is well over 100,000 young people, will be able to read at their grade level. And we say, well, that's a dream we can get behind. And that gives us fodder for how do we then build these villages, with that being one of the strategic goals.
It's also my dream for Zach, that he would be able to read it grade level.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't know how you write the books.
Yeah, that means a lot.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a big dream. Allison's a gift.
I got she is a gift, and I got early access to ChatGPT years ago. So it's been a big help. Apparently. Anyway, hey, 2 questions left for me. If someone is like hearing this and they're like, I love my city, I want to do something more for my city. This feels obviously very big and fully fleshed out, which I want to admit, like it is. Like we've spent years, like more than a decade solid, but even a couple decades into that has taken us to get to this point. But what's a good starting place, or what would you recommend for anyone listening that's like, I want to do something more for my city?
Sure. I have a good friend, Eric Swanson, who he'll be with us in April. He's taught all of us, especially in the States, about city networks. I call him the Yoda, affectionately refer to him as the Yoda of city network leadership. He kind of learned under Ray Bakke, who really is the Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Oh, there you go.
Ray passed away just last year, but after giving himself to over half a century of city network leadership. And the first thing they would say, so I'm going to offer you what we've learned that they offer to us that has a lot more credibility to it than what I can simply say, is you have got to listen to your city or your context or your community. Well, how do I do that? They would recommend that you create a list of the 50 movers and shakers in the city. They could be the faith side, they could be on the community service side, fire chief, police chief, mayor, business leaders, school educators, administrators. Create a list of 50, create 5 or 6 questions. We actually did this in the project, and then go and host listening tours and listen. Now, I would recommend creating a team. We did. We had 100 volunteers on the neighbor side. We interviewed over 500 neighbors. We had a team of 8 who were listening to faith leaders, and then we had other leaders who were hosting interviews with movers and shakers. And I would recommend doing that and taking 2 years to do it. I would take 2 years to listen. And the whole time you're prayerfully saying, Holy Spirit, where are you moving? And what you're wanting to identify is, number one, what's great about our city, because what God has created in that space, he ordained before time to reflect who he is. Now, that doesn't mean that sin hasn't marred it, but what sin marred, Jesus came to redeem. But the fruit of it, kind of the seeds of it, are good. And so what is it about our city or context that's good? Let's celebrate it. You need to be a chief celebrator or champion of your city. And so for Omaha, we want to champion Omaha. Okay. Number two, you want to listen to the people you're interviewing around what is broken in our city, meaning what needs to change. Everyone, regardless of faith context, has an idea of what needs to change. And everyone has different ideas. But as you make long lists of what they share, you'll start to find that there's some common ideas around that. So what celebrate? What's great? Number two, what's broken? Number three, ask this question: what could a caring community or a faith community, we use the word caring because we want to approach it as neutral as possible. What could a caring community do to help? And then just listen. We talk about this in listening to over 500 neighbors, that there are three core values that I think are core values of the human heart. Number one is they desire greater connectivity. Number two, they desire greater cleanliness. Number three, they desire opportunities for their children. Communities value young people. And so what we wanted to do is ensure that our outcomes aligned with the value structure of an Omaha neighbor, because then we would speak to their heart. And so I would say, number one, listen. Number two, then after you've listened, I would say dream big. That's where we identified, we started to build the State of the City project. You don't need to build this, but you need to build something that captures all of the listening that you've done with an action plan. When we work with city networks around the country, one of the things that I encourage that probably does bring me a bit of concern, not like capital C concern, but legitimate, like, be cautious about this, is that you do a bunch of listening and legwork and never go to action. Right? So you've got to create some kind of action, whatever it might be. So create action. We dreamt big. I would say if you want to talk to Barna and you don't have like a line into them, reach out to us. We'd be glad to connect you. We've done that for many cities. But we dreamed big with Barna. We said, what if we go after it? I'd rather be told no by someone I asked than never be told anything by someone I don't have the courage to ask. Number three, then I think you create a common shareable vision, and you do it with 30-year eyes. So a big shout out to our boy David Brooks. I really appreciate him, but just giving us that language. But we said a decade, and I'll explain why. We need to run after this together for 10 years because the majority of our partners are already planned out for the next 2. So if you create a 2-year strategic plan, by the time you sell it, you'll never have opportunity to engage people with it. So we actually created a 10-year plan knowing we'd build it for 2 years. And then by about year 3, 4, people will really be engaged in it. That's actually what's happening. We're in the second year. We're already starting to see some of the fruit of that plan that's happening around us. And so I would say that. So listen, dream big, create a common shareable vision with 30-year eyes. And
it's beautiful.
Be off the ground. Maybe
this question's similar. Maybe there's an aspect of that. But now let's get a little more singular focus. We ask all our guests to challenge, like the person who's listening, whether it's a pastor, everyday follower, to be a greater disciple this week. Like, what's something they can do this week that you would challenge them?
Yeah. As you are drawing near to Jesus, I want to assume that in our own human way, we're learning to do this more and more, sort of the John 14, right? Yeah. Abide. What I would say is practice living out Jesus' most basic command where you are. So if you're relating as a pastor with your staff, do that there. But when you go home to your cul-de-sac, do that there. When you're with your kids, parents, peers, you're around the soccer field, do that there. But also begin to dream for how you can activate people to do the same. But I would just say live out Jesus' most basic command where you are, and then activate people to do the same. It's
beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, you take that challenge on. You listen, you activate where you already are. # Red Letter Disciple. We want to challenge you, more encourage you actually along the journey. So, Chris, what you got for Jed?
Okay, let's go. 300. We're going to play a Family Feud style game very quickly.
I love this.
All right. This is based off the research from the amazing, compelling book, State of the City by Within Reach. Okay.
Are you testing him on his own research?
I am.
On his own book?
372 Omaha unchurched adults, 18 and older, between the time of August 25th and September 9th, 2022. Wow. We're asked this question. Which of the following items would most likely make you consider attending a church?
Are you going to give us the items and then?
No,
You just boom. This is like
the top 6 answers on the board.
Wow.
Why would an unchurched
Oh,
person?
Family Feud. Are we going against each other?
No, you can go together. You can go
Oh,
together.
okay.
Yeah,
You
go
go
ahead.
first.
Go ahead.
invitation by a trusted friend.
Invitation, and I'm going to give you that. If I was welcomed warmly was number 4. I'm going to give that.
This is what they would look for in a church.
No, they're just like, what would make you consider attending a church?
Relevant teaching.
Let's see, relevant teaching. Nope. Strike 1.
I'm going to get all 3 strikes for us.
You'd think I would know this, right?
That's all right.
I'm trying to mentally. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say a trusted leader. If I trusted the pastor.
That's a really good one. Number 5 answer. If I trusted the pastor.
Okay, I'm going to try not to get our second strike.
Yeah.
Community impact. Something.
Community impact. Really good answer. Second strike. Really?
Gosh, I don't know what people want in a church.
Teaching through the book of Leviticus.
That's not it. That is not it.
You're up.
You already have 3 strikes. The game's over.
He's got one more go.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Zach.
you
Come
each
on,
get
Zach.
3.
Wow,
People
you're changing the rules of our game.
Something around meaning and purpose.
Oh, that's
That it's going to
good.
give a meaning.
You know what? I am going to give you that.
Thank you.
I feel like something was missing in my life. Number 3, meaning and purpose. I'm going to give you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But you're still not the number you have.
What did we miss? Just
No,
tell
you
us
got,
what we
okay.
missed.
Number 1 was if I felt accepted when I went.
Yep.
Number 1. Number 2, wanting to connect with God.
Good. Spiritual openness. I like that. There you go. That's what they're looking for in a church, y'all. So
Thank you for that.
That was fun. That was
Jed, if,
fun.
Clearly, I need to reread the book
Yeah.
we published.
I mean, to be fair, there's like a million graphs.
Yeah,
And
the thing is awesome. If
Yeah.
you're a leader in Omaha, you should really pick this thing up.
You guys are encouraging.
yeah,
Thank you.
this power of stories written by somebody in there too. That's
Jeez.
pretty neat. But anyway, I don't know. Zizender, something like that.
Zender?
Thanks, Jed, for being. If people want to connect with you, where can they do that?
Yeah, withinreach.com, Jed at withinreach.com. Connect with me there. We'd love to communicate with you.
Cool, bro. Keep doing
Awesome.
what you're doing, and thanks for being
Yeah.
part of Red Letter Disciple today.
Really good stuff.
My pleasure.
Jed is so gracious of his time to be with us today, and just a powerful leader doing an amazing citywide movement. I hope you're taking some notes, because I know you want to reach your city for Jesus. And I love so much about what he's talking about. And he dropped a lot of knowledge, a lot of links, a lot of stuff. And so if you want to connect with Jed or any of those links, or see the great work of Within Reach, or even the State of the City project that Barna put on for our city, it's all going to be at the show notes, as well as an opportunity for you to connect with our partner, Hope Chest, and learn more about the vision trips to Uganda, Ethiopia, and Guatemala they have this summer. Go to redletterpodcast.com and look up episode 94, and you will be right where you need to be. Next week's guest is a really fun one. His name's Jonathan Anderson, and he is the coach of the Lake Mary Little League baseball team. And you might think, that's okay, a coach of a Little League team? Seriously, what are we doing, Zach? Well, he is the coach of the Little League World Series champions. That's right. We get to relive the moment with Coach Jonathan Anderson when their Florida team won it all, and go on a journey to discover how coaching offers rare opportunities to speak into the lives, in his case, of young men to raise up great disciples. Plus, we talk about the truth of where kids sports is now, where it's headed, and how we can be prepared for this engine in the future. And so you're not going to want to miss this conversation next week with Jonathan Anderson, so don't miss it. And the best way to ensure you don't is subscribe or follow. That way, when you hit your podcast platform next Tuesday morning, boom. I don't get how it works, but it'll just show up there. It's kind of amazing. So, hey, thank you all so much for your support. We'll see you back next week for the Red Letter Disciple.